It's common to hear teams discuss the importance of data-driven decision-making. Although this was once a lofty aspiration, innovations in the modern data stack, like data warehouses, data lakes, and business intelligence tools have made it simpler and cheaper than ever to make sense of real-time data. The rise of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and data mining has increased the value of data. However, there's an unsolved challenge. Insights gathered from this data are only valuable once they're used to make a change in the business that moves the needle forward. This is sometimes referred to as the last mile of analytics. Without that elusive last mile, analytics is at best a reactive report card for your business, at worst, a waste of time. Hundreds of companies struggle with this challenge. All data lives in the data warehouse. It's easy to do reporting, but it's tough to take action on that data. In short, the tools that companies acquire, like data warehouses, to de-silo the data has become a silo. I'm hoping our guest today has a few answers that could help with this challenge. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by Sproutwith.com. I'm Vinay Koshi, and our guest today is Tommy Yionoulis. Tommy, you've been in the restaurant industry for pretty much your entire adult life, I believe. You are a former stand-up comic and turned SaaS founder who has extensive experience helping businesses become more efficient and profitable through process accountability and data. You are the founder and managing director of Ops Analytica, an operations management platform that focuses on managing and measuring daily team activities for large multi-unit businesses. I believe, Tommy, that you believe the next big technological disruptor event for many businesses is going to be implementing operations management software to shape the future of work and beat our competitors to better, more consistent daily operations. I'm curious, Tommy, with your experience in the restaurant industry, was there a specific incident or event that triggered this journey about starting Ops Analytica?
Yeah, first of all, let me just say, your intro is so dead on. Man, you nailed it. It doesn't matter if you have all this data, if you can't take the data and translate it into an actual action that changes a customer's outcome, it doesn't matter. It's a waste of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so beautiful. Yes, there was. I was working at Quiznos, and in the US, I was at Quiznos in 2008, 2009. And Quiznos had was a 5,000 plus location sandwich chain. And they are known in the US as the largest franchise implosion ever. So they went from over 5,000 units down to 350 or below today. And I was in operations at that point. And they came to me and they said, hey, we're doing these audits. And an audit in a big, large multi-location business is we send out a field person that works for us to visit the location and do a quick 100, 200 question inspection, really just to see, are they meeting the standards? Do they have the right staff? Are they clean? All that kind of stuff. And they were doing them on paper, and doing anything on paper, you might as well not even do it. You heard about a silo. It's a silo that you can't even do anything with. Like, it's just a waste of data. So what ended up happening is their idea, my bosses, like the president and the COO, were like, hey, Tommy and his assistant will just data enter these into an Excel. And we're doing like 5,000 of these things a month. And I'm like, you guys just fired everybody because we had just passed the precipice and starting to head down the cliff. They had fired everybody. I'm sitting on 100 unanswered emails every day. I'm like, there's no way in hell like I can possibly get this into an Excel. So I went out and I tried to buy a solution, and there were some out on the market. It was still 2008, 2009. You got to remember, this is almost pre-iPhone, really. This is the Palm phones. This is those Windows mobile phones.
PDAs and things.
Yeah, exactly. So there wasn't like an easy solution to this. And everybody wanted to charge me like $10 an inspection. And that didn't work because we're doing 5,000 restaurants a month. That's 50,000 a month. That's not a affordable way to go. So I ended up building my own solution. I found a program called Form Router at the time, and it would allow you to build an online form, and then we could do a connection to go get the data down and drop it into an Excel. And so I built this audit that was a fully connected web page. Basically, you could answer questions on, but it was like it was transformative to the company. It was the first time ever where like they could go, hey, how are we doing on the audits right now? And within about 10 minutes, I could download it, dump it into this Excel I built and give it to management, and they could see how the stores were stacking up. So that was the catalyst to doing this program.
Brilliant. And given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
I think I'm a vision guy. I'm not a detail guy. I am forced to be a detail guy just so we can keep moving the ball forward. I think my biggest personal strength, and I don't think like I developed this, I think it's a personality type thing, is like I look at, I got to get to the top of Mount Everest. And I look at it as not, oh my gosh, how will we ever get to the top of Mount Everest? I just need to get right here, 10 feet in front of me. That's the first step. I think I'm good at breaking down very complex processes into a series of manageable steps. And what happened was when I left Quiznos, so I was at Quiznos and I built that thing, a buddy of mine from grad school, he was like, hey man, I just got recruited by Symantec to come leave my current company and do what I'm doing at my current company with Symantec, which is now Broadcom. They're the security software. And he was doing workflow, right? Business process workflow. And he was like, hey, would you want to leave Quiznos? You had such a good time building that form. Would you want to come and backfill me at my current company? Because they're looking for a new process management guy. And I was like, yeah, because I could see that Quiznos was a sinking ship. And so I taught myself and was taught BPM, business process management, which is basically programming without knowing how to code. So it's a kind of a WYSIWYG drag and drop, and you set components and variables and you connect it all up. And so like I was able to do that, I think, because I just was able to break down. I'm trying to do a program with no official like programming training, let's be clear here. But I could just break it down into steps. And I think that BPM too helps solidify that skill set in me, because it was just, you're coding, but you're using components and you have to break down all the different steps of this operation so that data comes in here and comes out here the way you want it. So I think that's probably the strength I have, is just being able to like, okay, that's what I got to do. Break it into small steps.
Oh, what would you say in that area of strength is something that businesses don't know but should?
I would suggest that businesses need to implement some form of an MVP in every sort of technical and data process that they're going to do. We were consultants for years in the Semantic Partner Channel, right? And I'll be honest with you, like 80% of our projects just ended. 20% people were like ecstatic, but 80% of them were always just, okay, I guess we're done. It works. And one of the biggest reasons for that was that a lot of the times we weren't working with professional project managers. We were working with a director in a company who was trying to make his mark. And that guy would load the project and keep changing it as we went and keep adding new features and blah, 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 blah. Until the code got so convoluted and hard to manage and so complex that it was just too complex and the process could barely function. And so what I would suggest to most people is, because people get carried away in the planning process, right? Whether they're trying to do whatever they're trying to do, a report, build a process, build whatever, they want to throw everything in the kitchen sink in there, and it becomes too hard to actually execute. And so what I would suggest is that you utilize that sort of strategy of a minimum viable product. What is the bare minimum that this thing needs to do to accomplish our goal, and then stop, and then get that built, because that'll be simpler and easier to do, and then allow people to use it for a couple of months and get some real feedback about what it's actually missing, and not just try to guess while you're at a brainstorming session, every feature and everything we have to do to make this work, right? Let's just get the bare minimum and go from there, because then you can actually continue to tack on features over time that add value, and you don't waste a bunch of time building stuff that nobody's going to use.
Would you say that there are, and that is absolutely critical and vital for just about any business, but would you say that there are additional benefits to making data-driven decisions, especially in the area of operations management?
Oh my gosh, yes. So the businesses that we primarily work with are large multi-location chains. We started in restaurants because we spoke restaurant. And if you're building a startup and you're trying to build a brand, you need to pick a lane and go down that path. But we are expanding out of that. We're in veterinary clinics, medical clinics, automotive, because when you talk about the large multi-location business, they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous in every strip center around the country. You'll have those chains that are out there. What happened was when these chains started to grow, like you can really, in the US at least, was McDonald's. And I know McDonald's has a huge presence in Australia as well too. But McDonald's, those guys were the first guys that really systematized restaurants and built a system that process. Whereas I think everybody else was just kind of, I got a menu, I'll make you the food, it's good. But what happened was that all started in the 50s. When there was technology like we have today did not exist, right? And so they had to do the next best thing. They set processes, but they realized I can't see in real time into what's happening in every one of my stores. It doesn't exist. That's a magical concept to the McDonald's brothers. But what they did was they said, well, we still want to grow. We got to have these systems. We need to control what we can control. And they focused on training, memorization-based training, and paper-based processes, right? With a high level of oversight and management within the organization so that they could get out to the stores, see what's happening. They would do these paper audits like I was doing at Quiznos 70 years later. And that's what they focused on. But what that requires are really good managers, not only at the store level, but that requires really good, what we would call above store managers too. Those layers of hierarchy that manage, like that you might have one manager to 10 to 100 stores, depending on how your business is set up. So it required to have the best quality level of manager who can execute those processes and hold their team accountable and be accountable to themselves. And then the management layers above them. And then also it really requires a lot of people with a lot of experience that they can try to use their experience to guide through when you don't have any data. You're trying to make educated guesses, right? And what most of these chains do who don't have a platform like us is they back into how they're doing operationally by looking at some other KPIs like sales, food costs, labor costs, customer satisfaction, in the restaurants at least. And then maybe anything else they can figure out that they can use to go, if this is okay, then that probably means we're doing okay over here, right? And that worked. And we had these giant chains, tens of thousands of locations all around the world, billions of dollars in revenue. But what's happened in the last 10 to 12 years is that technology has gone past that. You don't have to rely on hunches and supposition and, well, we did this in 1986 and it worked fine. We should do that again today and it'll work fine anymore. We now can actually just capture operations data in real time and use that to make better decisions. Because when you're looking at lagging indicators, they're lagging for a reason. They're not accurate to what's happening today. And the speed of business today, right? Can you imagine like going to investors and being like, hey, I'm going to start a 7,000 location chain and I will have no visibility into what's happening into my locations in real time. But that investor would kick you out of the room. But that's how these businesses have evolved. But now, and it worked. I'm not saying it didn't work. I'm just saying there's now a much better way where you can get real data in real time and then make better decisions. And that's what we're trying to push people to, because if you can't do that part of it, then you can't have automation. You can't have automation. You can't have robots. You can't do any of those other things because you don't have any data and any kind of concept of what you're going to feed in there and connect it up to. You know what I mean?
What you're saying is very interesting. Now, while there is a lot of attractiveness in having a lot of data around your processes and things of that nature, and for a lot of companies, they've got established processes and systems and culture, et cetera, in place. Is there a prerequisite that does seem to be perhaps overlooking as they set up these systems in order to make sure that they're best able to utilize data that they're acquiring from a variety of different sources? Because it's certainly one thing to say, it'd be nice to get data from a bunch
Of
of different sources, but without the internal structures within the company and perhaps the culture within the company, I would imagine it would be difficult to A, keep an eye on it, and B, actively do something with it.
Yeah, I think the biggest prerequisite I would say is that, and I have a blog on this, but like the biggest, especially in the restaurant industry, like the biggest like known but not discussed secret is that no one's following any of these processes that they've created at the store level. They're either not doing their checklists today or they're pencil whipping them. And pencil whipping them just is like a term that just means like you just go through and you just say, and you fill out the thing in 35 seconds and you don't actually use it, right? You as the tool that it is. Because a checklist is a tool, but it's meant to do is to remind you of key things that you needed to check on and make sure we're covered so that the entire process can function properly, right? And when you just go, yes, there's zero value in that, right? And there's even lower amount of value in not doing it at all. And so I think the biggest prerequisite when you're talking about, at least within multi-location businesses, is that because these generally are being done on paper before a platform like mine's been brought in, is that you think your people are doing their stuff and they're telling you they're doing their stuff, but they're not doing it. So the hardest part is a lot of these organizations find out is nobody's doing anything. And now we have to change. We have to now manage differently because now we know they're not doing their stuff. And now we've got to get them to start doing their stuff. And that can be very difficult to pull that through. And it takes buy-in from every level of the organization, from the president to the operations infrastructure down to the managers, of why do we do this? Why is it important? And how are we going to manage this internally to get this done? And that's the thing I don't think any of these guys are actually aware of. They just assume people are doing their stuff because they've built in like a laziness within their organization to allow that to go on. With paper, it's impossible to know unless you walk in the building, go open the book and look at it. And that's why these people have gotten away from not doing it for so long, is because there was no accountability mechanism that was easy enough to do, actually hold them accountable. So that's the big thing, is you got to understand as a company how important this is to you, why you want to do it. And then you need to start building infrastructure in within your own company of going, okay, we're going to hold people accountable to doing this now. And there's going to be real consequences. And we're going to do it because we believe that the value that it brings is greater than the cost of getting it done and the heartache of making people do stuff they don't want to do.
I agree with the whole accountability side of things, but I'm curious, would you say there should be an element of motivation in how we recruit and structure roles in order for people to realize that without this kind of data acquisition and usage, it's almost impossible to do your job effectively, which in other words affects your livelihood and ability to perform?
Absolutely. And I think part of that is, I think the problem that the resistance that we've always run into when we've been selling to these larger chains is that they look at this as, that's just a paper checklist, right? And who cares? It's like, that's an opening checklist or that's a food safety checklist. That doesn't really matter and in a lot of ways it doesn't matter because they internally know that nobody's doing them today and they're still have 7,000 locations and still make a lot of money. So they're just like, hey, like they think of it as just paper checklists, right? Or they're just like daily operational checklists and blah, 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 blah. And so they don't feel like this is going to actually transform their business. And that's because they've only had paper. They've never been on a digital platform and they don't understand the strengths of the digital platform. And once they get over that hump and then they go, oh my gosh, this actually is like incredibly enlightening, then they tend to start holding people more accountable. But at the beginning, they just don't know what they don't know, right? I have a quote from one of my clients that said, you keep us from making $1 million mistakes. And you go, wow, that's a great quote, obviously. And you like to market off those kind of quotes. But let me give you the example of what they were talking about, because I think it really shines a light on how powerful data can be when you have access to it. So they are a burrito chain. They have about 750 locations. And they were getting reports that their restaurants were dirty. So they got to report their restaurants were dirty. So then they look into it as best they can and they go, oh man, what should we do? We have dirty restaurants. We should add 4 hours of labor a day to every store that we own, which would be 2 hours for lunch, 2 hours at dinner. Just have a guy in the dining room cleaning up the restaurant, keeping it super clean, which if you have no other data is a totally rational like solution to that problem. If that's all you had, if that's all you knew, someone told you that, you go, yeah, it makes complete sense. 4 hours a day, go for it. But of course, it's not 4 hours a day. It's 4 hours a day of labor, plus all the training, the time to hire the guy, all the paperwork you got to do when the guy quits. It ends up being way more than just 4 labor hours a day. But then they used our platform because we had just been implemented in that chain, and they started prying in and they started gathering pictures and data from the teams, and they were able to target the restaurants that said they were dirty, and they were able to determine that it wasn't actually dirty dining rooms. It was the trash cans were too small and a percentage of their restaurants. And so that made them look dirty because they were filling up and then they were busy. So people weren't able to get away from behind the counter to go empty them, right? And so had they done choice A, which was hire 4 people or 4 more hours a day and throw them in 350 stores, which were the ones they owned, that would have cost them in just labor without any extraordinary cost over $5 million a year. But instead, because they were able to drill in and actually crowdsource data from the teams in the field, they were able to figure out they just needed some $20 trash cans, and they were able to go buy those for the stores that needed them and move on. And that's one very simple example of how does having real data drive business outcomes, because they would have been completely justified to hire those extra people had they not been able to have had a platform that would allow them to dig a little bit deeper and figure it out.
I'm also curious, imagine that people in the front line and certainly store managers would be quite busy with day-to-day operations and all that's happening in front of them. Is there something to be said, a person saying, look, all of this data could be really useful and I can understand how it works, but it's just too much for me? And how do you take away the fear and complexity of filling in what can seem to be rather a mundane activity from what's right before them?
People hate checklists, man. The only people who like checklists are pilots.
Yeah.
Because it's so ingrained in them. And surgeons have made the switch. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. Amazing read. Anybody who's out there, you should, if you're listening to this podcast, check it out. It's just a very entertaining book, but it talks about the safe surgery checklist. It talks about restaurants, pilots, the whole thing. It's really cool. People hate, and we're still in version 1.0 of this world of digitizing operations. We're not even in our sort of second version, if you will, of this. We're still just taking paper checklists from our clients and we're just putting them into our platform because that's all they have. And those paper checklists were developed over 30, 50 years. They're usually the lowest common denominator. But that's all they have. And the chains, unless the chains are mandating the checklists and building them for a digital platform versus a paper platform, we're getting these very convoluted long checklists. And I always tell our clients, you don't get any extra credit for having the longest checklist in the world. It's ridiculous. And we're really trying to push people towards are building digital first checklists that take advantage of the things that we can do in a digital platform that you can't do on a piece of paper. And our platform, like as we sit in our like competitive space, we are the leaders in 2 areas, reporting and in our logic engine, right? And with our business logic engine, we can build what we call dynamic checklists. These are checklists that basically conform to each location as they load. So you can have one checklist for your entire chain, but each location is always 5% different. They have different menu item, maybe here or there. They were in a building that used to be a Pizza Hut, so they don't have a drive-through. There's all these little differences. And our checklists are capable of conforming to the locations that they get deployed at. So they're always perfect. But then even after that, what we're trying to get people to do is we check that at lunch. Do we need to check it at dinner? Can we randomize things? Can we switch it up? Can we make them shorter and more efficient so that they don't take as much time? The other thing that we've done is we've added real-time collaboration to this. Because the biggest reason a Google Doc, where you and I are both in the same spreadsheet, we could both be working simultaneously, it's exactly the same technology as they have. What ends up happening is The reason why a lot of these checklists don't get done is it's really a cultural thing. Managers, like the whole organization, the managers are the only ones that can do the checklist. Think about any business that you go to. There are all these different stations, whether you're getting your tires changed or you're at a restaurant. Like that way, with the real-time collaboration, a manager can take a device and go, hey, I'm going to go do these parts of the checklist. You do your station and then give it to Bill over here and he'll do his station afterwards. And now you can get 4 or 5 people simultaneously working the same checklist and get it done in 5 to 7 minutes. Whereas if the manager had to do it linearly and do every part of it, it would take that person an hour. And that's a real issue on the reason why checklists don't get done and they get pencil whipped. Because when we need most of these checklists to get done, especially the setup ones, the preparatory ones, getting ready to open the doors for business, they coincide with the busiest period of the day for that manager, which is right before when all the employees are coming in, when everything's getting ready to go. You can't expect this person to stop and take an hour and go, okay, check this, check that. But if they can delegate, which is what a good manager does, it's investing in your employees. You can delegate those responsibilities to a couple of team members, then you can all do it in 5 to 10 minutes versus an hour. And so we've added, literally coded in specific functionality to try to make it easier for these operators to get these things done, because you cannot relax the standard. I get that it's mundane. I get it. You're in charge of controlling what you can control in your business. And everything on that checklist has been identified as something that irritates customers. Then when we don't do it correctly, right? A dirty table, dirty floor, the food takes too long, whatever it is, all those things anger customers. And if we keep angering customers, then they stop coming eventually and we all go out of business, right? So we can't relax the standard. What we have to do is keep the standard high, but we have to facilitate making it easier for the teams at the stores to double check all those things that they need to check. No one would be comfortable if the pilot on your 747 going from Australia to the US was like, I don't care. I've flown 1,000. I've done this flight 1,000 times. I don't need to go look at the engines. That's not a good, you don't want that to happen, right? And that's the same thing with your restaurant or your car, the place you're getting your car fixed. We know of like businesses where like they're constantly dropping people's engines, breaking their engines because they're missing putting the oil pan screw back in. Like that's those are like little things. They're dumb, but if you don't check them, that just your customer, you just cost your business thousands of dollars and you've inconvenienced your customer for life.
Absolutely. With this idea of making things easier, correct me if I'm wrong, but do you actually integrate with existing systems in, say, a restaurant, as opposed to adding additional hardware or interfaces, etc., for people to complete those checklists and things?
So we're a web app. So you could put this on your POS system. You could put this on your back office computer in your POS system. But the idea behind our platform is that it's on a mobile device, which most businesses have. They have a tablet or something for something else, maybe a register tablet, whatever. But the idea is that you physically walk around with the tablet or a phone and you check the things and you answer the questions. And then if there's a problem, we can do as little as just require a comment or a photo. And at the most, we can take you through a series of troubleshooting steps and workflow to get you to diagnose the problem and get it done. I would say like the operational checklists that are like double checking things, those are meant to be done mobilely, walking around. We have Excel-like functionality in our platform as well too. So if you're doing like business stuff, like a lot of the times they'll do all their deposits in our platform and track the cash counts and all that kind of stuff. Those things get done in the back office. But we are a siloed system today, in that we operate independently, like we don't connect up to any other systems within the business because we're 100% focused just on operations. But I will tell you a little hint is that we are in the very beginning phases of embedding artificial intelligence and predictive analytics into the platform. And when that ability will allow us to then bring in other sources of data and merge it with our operations data that we're creating.
Fascinating. I'm curious, as I'm listening to all of this, I wonder how much of the conversations that you're having with these organizations is about decentralizing the decision-making ability down to the lowest rungs in the organizations, that they can review the data and take action within location unit itself.
It's a little bit. It's more about what our platform does is it shows you what's actually happening in your location, the good and the bad. And so I think where that kind of decentralized management would play in with our platform would be allowing a general manager or an owner of a store or a series of stores to better manage their teams within the business. Hey, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, and we're seeing more customer complaints or whatever. Having that data to better hold the teams accountable to following the procedures. I wouldn't suggest that those guys don't have any power to change what they're doing. You know what I mean? They're not like, oh, I'm gonna start selling boba because I like boba. Nah, like that kind of stuff gets nixed. That stuff stays at corporate, and it doesn't allow them to change their menus or change the operations anyway. It just allows them to be more efficient. But where it does add a ton of value, and it gives people, employees, especially hourly employees, a voice to corporate, is it's an amazing way to crowdsource data. We've gotten reports that all the soda machines are leaking. Is your soda machine leaking? Yes. Do you know why? Oh yeah, the hose doesn't connect in the back. Okay, like the part's really bad. Like they can go out and get that kind of information effortlessly now from thousands of locations in an hour or two. And boom, they can then go back to their vendor and be like, you got to get us better hose clamps. You know what I mean? That's the kind of data that they couldn't collect before, that was just siloed at the stores, that they can now crowdsource not only what's happening, but what should we do to fix it? And that's what I think is such a massive value that people don't even expect to get because they're not thinking that way. But when they have that ability to just quickly field a question, like you literally add a question, hit save, and then everyone's got it, right? And you start collecting data on it, and the next literal and checklist completed.
So we've been talking about capturing data from multiple sources. You also talk about data accuracy scoring.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that, and why look at it?
Data accuracy scoring is the ability to determine if the data we're collecting is accurate or not, based on several different variables that we track from a metadata perspective as people are filling out their checklists. And the reason it's important is because if you've ever done any data analytics, right, you get this giant Excel or SQL file or CSV of just millions of rows of data, right? Like just insane amount of data. And then if you don't understand the system that's collecting the data, how it actually works, how that data is saved and what each field means and how that is captured, then you have to have that deep of a knowledge of how the data is actually being collected to be able to analyze it. But you also have to start looking for, because there's always garbage data mixed within the good data, right? You're trying to like scrub the data. And on most analysts, they don't have any clue what's happening on the data collection side. And they have no way to influence that because it might be a cash register or it might be an online store. And it's just, this is what you get. And you have to scrub that data because garbage in, garbage out for making decisions. We're very blessed in that our platform is, we are the data collection tool, right? We are the data collection tool and the data analysis tool. So the checklists are completed by your employee. You build the checklists. They utilize our platform to collect the data. And so we are in this unique ability where we can get insights into how the data is actually being collected. And then we can score it as accurate or not accurate as it's coming into the system, which means that from a data analysis perspective, you can go and look at a dashboard and you can go, I need to make a decision on a very specific question in the system. So then you can literally push one button, accurate, and it will filter out everything that we would consider pencil whipped or not accurate. And now you're just looking at responses to that question that the system believes were completed accurately. So you're making a decision on accurate data. All the data that we filtered out, all the not accurate data, is also valuable. but it's valuable in a different way. It's valuable in, these are the people I need to follow up with because they're not collecting accurate data. And that's hurting our ability to make good data-driven decisions. So the accurate data is great for making decisions on a piece of information or a response, or identifying the people who are doing things right. And the not accurate data is useful for identifying the people you need to coach and manage better to do a better job of collecting data.
That's a vital piece there. How do you correlate the data that you're collecting with KPIs that are established? Do people have to specifically look at certain data points in order to establish whether they're hitting the KPIs, or is there an additional level of massaging of the data that's required in order to extract the information that they're looking for?
So we track on checklists, and the way our system's built is we schedule everything, because these are generally recurring processes, whether they're daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever, but they're all recurring. So we have we schedule everything out, and we like to say we take the guesswork out of running the location, because you don't have to think or remember it's Tuesday. You just have to open up the Ops Analytica, look at the schedule, and everything you need to do is right there. And then as you go into each checklist, there's a series of points you need to go check. So by scheduling things, we can then track if they're getting done on time. And if they're getting done, and if they're getting done on time, if they're getting done late, and if they're getting done when they're operationally significant, right? Because one of the things that we do is we give checklist windows. Like we say, okay, this is due at 11:30. We don't want you to start it until 10:30. Because one of the big things you have to worry about when you have paper checklists is that someone just comes in, gets a cup of coffee, gets a cup of tea, gets a cigarette, sits down, bangs out all their checklists at 7 a.m. and then just throws, and that's just part of their opening routine. We force them to do the checklist when they're operationally significant, because that's when the business gets a value out of doing them, right? You can't tempt the dinner line at lunchtime. You have to wait till dinner to do it. So we have these windows and these schedules, and what that does is it gives them a KPI right there. What's my completed percentage? How well am I doing at this location or as a chain at getting things done on time, late? How much are we missing? How many violations? So we have issues and critical issues. And critical issues are a subset of issues. We track those as well. So your biggest KPIs about the operations health of your business are right there on the dashboard, very tippy top. And then you can drill in by looking at maps and filters to try to figure out how is your location doing versus the chain, or what are my biggest issues. But yeah, it's all right there for you at the top. We also track score on every checklist, but we don't recommend that as a KPI that you manage to when it is a store level employee filling out the checklist. Because if you say, hey, if you get 100, good job, guess what? You're going to get 100 every time. The only time we tell our clients to use score is when they have an objective person doing a checklist that should be scored. But score can also be important too, because it can tell you if someone's getting a 50%, man, maybe they have an issue, but it wasn't a critical, right? So you can use score, but you shouldn't like reward on score unless it's a third-party person who has a clear incentive chain to do this accurately, which is tough in these businesses because a lot of the times the guy who's inspecting is also responsible for that store. So they want to be honest, but they don't want to be so honest that it might show up that they're doing a bad job, right? There's so many layers to getting accurate data out of these things.
I'd like to go back to something you were talking about earlier, which is this idea of a minimum viable product. So if, say, an organization wanted to try something new and implement an MVP to see how it got traction or didn't get traction,
Sure.
How would we be able to use a platform like you in order to determine its viability?
I guess if you were like looking to bring in our platform, first of all, you're going to get a pilot period where you can come in, we'll build you some checklists, and you'll be able to do it at a limited amount of stores and just test it, right? Nobody in the world who has operations is going to change how their stores operate across an entire chain without testing it first and seeing that it really works. So just in that respect alone, if somebody wanted to come in and just test something out, we would absolutely get them set up to do that. We give a time period, agree on some parameters, and then let them go to town so they could actually go and test it. But the way we recommend people do that is let's say you already have the platform and you just want to test out a process. What you do is you pick a limited amount of stores, usually 1 or 2 regions, if you will, where there's a dedicated manager, and you just run a test, and you run a test for just a couple of weeks and just see if the data you're collecting is good. And then if it's answering the questions you're trying to get it to answer for you at corporate, right? Because what ends up happening, which is like my favorite part of this business, is that most of our companies start off with some very set, what I call their red book processes. The red book was like literally like a red book that you would order like 3 months in advance, and it would have all your checklists for every day of the month. And you would get like 3 of them for the next quarter, and you'd fill them out. And those are your basic daily checklists. But and those are important because it shows manager efficacy at the store level. How well is this guy operating? And if they're doing them accurately, what we see is that customer satisfaction goes up because the customer's experience is better because all the little things are being checked off and crossed off on. But then what's really empowering for us as a platform is to see how people are utilizing the platform in addition to those red book processes, right? Just capturing data for the government and for risk management and for food safety issues or whatever it is, they start managing their entire business with our platform. And because it doesn't take anything to field a checklist other than the 10 or 15 minutes it takes to create it. And then you put a schedule on it, and then you could set it to a group of 10 restaurants or the whole chain, and you can just hit save and it's out there. And then you just start collecting data. So it is an iterative platform that wants you to experiment with it. It wants you to just be utilizing it as much as you can to capture the data you need to run your business. There's nothing special you have to do other than just build a checklist, put it out there, and see what data you get back.
I'm assuming that with this idea of incorporating checklists and being very data-driven in our thinking and the outcomes that we wish to see happen, we talked about culture as being perhaps a bit of a prerequisite. What would you say would be the essential elements in establishing a data-driven culture that empowers individuals to better the organization holistically?
I think that's the key to making this successful, right? Like it really is. If you come in there and you're like, we got to do this on the computer now, that as a manager, that sets the tone of this is BS. What you have to let people know is that data-driven decision-making is better decision-making than hunch and experience-based decision-making, which is what we've always had, but we're moving to this data-driven model. Why? Because it makes it easier for us to make better decisions, right? It's 2 aspects. One, we're going to make better decisions. We're not going to waste your time on a bunch of dumb stuff because we're going to make a better decision, and we're going to make it, it's going to be easier for us to make it. And I add one more to that. It's going to be quicker for us to make decisions, make changes, implement changes. That's the beauty of our system because we collect the data. We're the process we're the process tool for ensuring that people do stuff. When you get information, you can just change the checklist and now you've changed the process, right? And it makes it such a seamless sort of feedback loop, if you will. But you've got to convince people that that data is the key for us being successful. And we want to hear from you. We want you to fill these things out. We want you to leave comments. We want you to take pictures. We want to know what's really happening down here so we can be better, because we are locked in this massively competitive world where we're battling it out with 5 other brands trying to get as many customers as possible so you can get a raise and you can have benefits and you can take days off and get paid. All the things that you want come from the business as a whole being successful. But we need that data. We need to know what's really happening. You've got to tell us. And especially with this generation that we have today, they want to feel valued. They want to feel like they have a voice. They generally don't like repeatable processes like this. They want to be more creative, but they can't be because we have to make the same sandwich the same way every time. But you can be creative in telling us what's going on. What are your thoughts? You have a voice when you utilize these checklists. You have a voice by doing them accurately and giving us insights about what's happening. And that's how we have to sell it. This isn't about us looking over your shoulder and being big brother. This is about us being faster to react to problems that are affecting customers so we can change the process so it irritates as few customers as possible so we can win. And that's really what my whole platform is about. It's about making sure that we irritate as few customers as possible so that they keep coming back and keep having good experiences. And if you do that faster than your competitor does it, you will grow your sales. You know what I mean? Faster than they are. And as you grow your sales, more advertising money, better locations, better benefits, better everything comes from that. And that's how the business wins. And people want to work at a location, even if it's not their dream job, even if it's not my permanent job, I have a career making the fries, but they want to work at a business that's booming. And they want to feel like they're part of a team, and they want to feel like their voice is being heard. You have the opportunity that you could write something and that could end up in the CEO of your company's hands. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can't do that on paper. And that's the culture you have to create, a culture of excellence and of data and being fast and great.
If I could put this another way, I'm certainly hearing elements of transparency and communication being vital. You've talked about data and wanting to be nimble and agile. Am I missing something else?
I think you got it, man. Yeah, you do.
I'm curious, is there a danger in that we will over-rely on checklists and numbers and data that impairs our ability to listen?
I think that's true. I think it's interesting because when we started this in the early years, we were like, you should get rid of your field teams. And because you're paying these field guys, a good field guy in the US is going to probably make between 125 to 150,000 a year, plus travel and car allowance. They're a very expensive employee. And we tried to sell people on, right now you do paper checklists and you have a field guy that's bouncing around all your locations. We were like, why wouldn't you just do dailies, cut down your field teams, and then just really manage like from a centralized corporate infrastructure? And that went over like a lead balloon, like just imploded. No one was like, everyone's like, yeah, because the field guys do so much more than just they have a lot of different job roles within the business, including training and coaching, and they're there to help out, whatever. So that didn't work. But I do think you have to take the checklists, right, and the data you're bringing in, but you still need that human element to get into the store and tell you what's really happening. And in most of our organizations, you're going to be doing a series of daily checklists that are just, once again, preparatory, make sure you're ready to go, make sure you're safe, you're clean, and you can maximize your sales opportunity for that day. But there's also a lot of what we would call field team level checklists, where they're coming in and inspecting the location from a sort of corporate's perspective of how well are you doing at executing your business, right? Because the general manager is responsible for the business. So they're coming in and they're getting eyes on the prize. The other thing is, I think we really need to make sure we're getting a lot of photos, because photos really, anybody can say yes to something on a checklist. It's harder to fake when you take a picture. And I'm going to give you a great example of an ROI. So I have a client, they're a sub chain, 450 units, and here in the US. And they had a question on their checklist that was for their closing manager checklist. Have you ensured everyone was punched out? And originally it was a true false checklist, yes or no. And so they would say yes every time. And they were like, no, that's not true. But the guys weren't like going and actually being responsible and checking. So then they switched that to a photo question. Take a picture of the computer that shows everybody's punched out. What that forced people to do was go to the register, look at the time clock, and if people weren't punched out, they didn't want to take a picture of that. So they would punch them out and get them off the clock. And so that's saving them $10,000 a month in paying people for time that they weren't actually at the restaurant, but they just didn't punch out and the system hadn't punched them out yet. So you're just catching one or two people that got an extra 10 minutes of pay. But if you extrapolate that out over 450 locations, buck here, a buck there, that kind of thing, that ends up being $10,000 a month. And that's one question on a checklist. It's just having that kind of accountability in the system is priceless when you think about it. But you got to have you got to have people in the field that are going in and seeing what's really happening and helping people utilizing that data to help the team in the store. And that's that same chain, the chain that the 10,000 a month thing. They're like, oh, it's cool that everybody does the daily checklist. But what they've really found is that it's helped them better manage and develop their field team people that are overseeing their corporate restaurants. That's where they've seen the big value is making those guys more efficient because they are truly a cost. The field team is a cost. The store team is generating revenue. So making that cost level more efficient is massively important to the profitability of the company.
This is really fascinating. Tommy, is there an aspect that you feel doesn't get talked about very much when it comes to this whole idea of operations management? If so, what would it be?
I think our biggest competitor is still paper today, by far. I think operations management, this ability to set the tone, digitally set the tone, this is what I need you to do, this is what I want you to do, and then collecting that data so then you can make better decisions with it, and then being able to create that feedback loop and change the process, that whole thing. Having real-time visibility and accountability is still very new. But it is what I believe is going to be the next major revolution within multi-location management across all businesses, because process is process and workflow promised process, but they promised process without having to be able to code. But the reality is that workflow has never really been fully, the promise of workflow and BPM, I don't believe was ever fully realized, because it really did require, even though you didn't know how to code, you needed to know how to program a software solution. And that's not like a skill that most of us have, right? But I do think this operations management is the next big thing, because when you look at the future, you're going to have in a business 5 main data feeds that'll be pushing data from within your building back to you. It's going to be your people doing checklists, like on my system. It's going to be your sensors, your IoT sensors. It's going to be your robots. It's going to be your cash register, or your POS system. And it's going to be the internet. And those are 5 data streams that are coming into your business, that will be coming into your business in the future. And then you're going to need a solution that can take those data streams, look at them in real time, and then tell your robots and your people to go do some action, right? That to go fix whatever the issue is. So if somebody walked out of your business and said, oh my gosh, just was at this place and man, their bathroom was like a dumpster fire, and they tweet that now is available to the world, but it's available to you at that store, even though you don't have time to be on Twitter, but Twitter can be monitored by other systems in real time that could then go, hey, dumpster fire sounds bad, bathroom sounds bad. Let's attach this tweet to a task and assign it to the general manager to go look at it. And so you can, once again, who can be better at collecting data, analyzing it, and then fixing issues that are affecting customers faster is going to win in the future. And so that's where this is all going. And as chains start to adopt this technology fully, and we go into version 2, where we're building things digital first, and we're looking at our business from a digital operations first perspective, as we start to do that as an industry, what's going to happen is you're going to see brands that are implementing this kind of level of service and operations are going to start winning, and winning at a rapid pace. And what's going to be tough is if you're number 2, you're not going to, it's not one thing, right? They're not doing one thing. They're just operating better as a whole. They're not literally, they didn't do an extra ad or change a POS or all these simple solutions that people are looking for. They simply ran their business better and identified issues faster, but they're going to grow. And then as your sales increase, your advertising increases, your locations get better, your specials get better, and you can just pull ahead. So I really do believe that in the next 5 years, businesses who start implementing operations management and start really getting after it are going to incrementally grow faster than their competitors, because people aren't, especially in the US right now, we have really bad inflation. Service has been really bad since the pandemic. A lot of people have left these sort of basic like retail and restaurant jobs, and people are getting fed up. I'm fed up. I'm talking to all these people. They're fed up too. They're tired of paying more for less. And so if you can't execute in this new world efficiently, then you're going to lose customers, period, to the people who can. And that's pure capitalism.
To wrap things up, Tommy, if you were listening to this podcast episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I would say that if you're that process and systems are so important to any business's success. All a business is a series of repeatable processes and systems. That's it. That's all a business is. And if you don't have those, then you really don't have a business. You just have a cult of personality. If you own a business and you can't go on vacation, you don't have a business. You have this thing that you do. And implementing process and systems, it just, as Atul Gawande would say in the Checklist Manifesto, the problem isn't having enough data, it's having too much data. And the problem is that the human brain cannot keep up with all of the tasks it needs to do. So you have to take some of that stress away from your employees by giving them easy to use systems that you can customize to work for your business that are going to help them be better at their business, help them be better. Because it's when employees are stressed out and they don't feel like they're doing a good job, that's a big catalyst on why a lot of people quit, right? So just make their job easier, take the guesswork out of it, hold them accountable. And that's the second part of it is, you were doing that on paper, you just weren't holding anyone accountable to doing anything. If you're gonna have a system, you gotta hold people accountable to following it, or it's just a giant waste of time and money. And you also set some very bad precedents within your organization. If you ask people to do stuff and you don't hold them accountable to doing it, you can get yourself into a whole mess there. So just focus on process and systems, build a culture that respects data-driven decisions, process and systems, and your business will flourish. And you as a manager will be able to focus on building your business, not running it.
I love the possibilities that your platform introduces, especially without the need for an analytics or statistics degree or a data scientist.
Yes.
It's almost democratizing the ability to use data, and that's wonderful. But tell me, if listeners are curious, wanted to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Part of my job today is meeting people and learning what they're dealing with and seeing if I can help them. So please go to opsanalytica.com. It'll be in the show notes. Get on the chat. Say, hey, I want to talk to Tommy. I will literally sit down with anybody for 30 minutes and listen to what you're dealing with and see if I can help you. I meet a lot of cool people with a lot of cool solutions. So I'm happy to point you in the right direction if it's not me. And you can also friend me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's my social media world.
Terrific. We'll include links to those in the show notes. Tommy, thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate you taking the time out.
Thank you so much. And really enjoyed it.